Care to Chat. Hello and welcome to the Northern Ireland Social Care Council's popular podcast, Care to Chat. I'm Wendy Austin and it's my great pleasure to host these podcasts. Real privilege to hear the stories of social care practitioners and social workers and their clients, and to hear too about the many different and important aspects of the work itself. There's a huge range of situations in which they come into play, from domiciliary care to complex areas like criminal justice, from early years to end of life. We've tackled many topics in our 3 series of Care to Chat, but perhaps none more sensitive than this episode. It's all about calling it out, about racism and the need for diversity in the social work and social care workforce. We've all been appalled by what's happened in some of our towns in recent times, with racist attacks on people from other countries. The Health Minister, Mike Nesbitt, spoke of his concerns for those in the health and social care family, without whom, he said, the system would collapse. And when you realise that there are almost 8,000 people registered in social work and social care here, well, he's not exaggerating, is he? So just by the way, there's a bit of a content warning for you listening to this episode. It deals with sensitive issues related to racism and other forms of discrimination. If this topic raises sensitive or triggering emotions for you, now may not be the right time for you to listen to it. Look after yourself when listening to this and ensure you seek support. So we're going to hear from Beverly Simpson, her personal experience. She's a registered nurse who works in a care home in the Western Health and Social Care Trust area. And she's also co-chair of the Black and Migrant Workers Group in UNISON. Ineke Houtenbos is Senior Safeguarding Training Consultant and the chair of the Black Worker Support Group with the NSPCC. Aine Morrison is Chief Social Worker, the Department of Health, and John Patrick Clayton is Head of Bargaining and Representation at UNISON. So real experts who have unique and relevant experiences and understanding of this complex issue and why it's important to encourage diversity in the social work and social care workforces. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you all today. Thank you so much for coming along. And let's start with you. Why is it important to be here today having this conversation?
I think it's important because we know that racism is a major issue in our society and in our workforces as well. And we've, as you've said, Wendy, we've seen the recent appalling racist attacks and disorder. But I think we also know, as well as that we have less overt racism affecting many people in the workforce as well. And racism, it's a very insidious thing. We know racism can affect every bit of somebody's life. So it's important because we need to support our workforce. It's important because, our core values in social work and social care are all about respect and dignity and person-centredness. In social work, we place a lot of store on the importance of anti-oppressive practice, including anti-racist practice. Social work and social care, they're all about equality and a lack of discrimination and treating people with, I suppose, in the way that all of us want to be treated, which is with that respect and dignity. So it's very important that we respond to what we hear and what we know is happening, so that we have a workforce who are well supported, who I suppose who know how to challenge racism when they see it or hear it, and as a department, those are the responses that we want to foster and develop.
How big is the problem? I mean, these things come to the surface every now and again, don't they? And horrible as they are, but you just know that it's bubbling under. So how big do you think the problem is?
Unfortunately, we don't know. And that's certainly an area that we need to do a lot more work on, so that we're collating our statistics, we're gathering our experience. We do have almost 8,000 people who are registered in social work or social care as coming from outside the UK and Ireland, although that does not necessarily correlate directly to ethnicity. But that those 8,000 come from across 70 different countries. And that's a substantial part of our workforce who may well experience racism. I I think we also know that we very much want to increase the diversity of our workforce. It's already significant enough, but we need our international workforce, and we want to support them well. I suppose a lot of my experience of what happens to people is gained from hearing the personal stories.
Ineke, how big do you think the problem is? I mean, I've asked Aine, but how big is it in your view?
When you look at the statistics for Northern Ireland, there's just over 400 racially motivated hate incidents reported in the past year. So it is a significant issue within Northern Ireland, because if you take into consideration that only 3.4% of the population in Northern Ireland is from an ethnically minoritized community, and you kind of compare that to the relatively high number of racial incidents which are reported. So as Aine was saying, there's a lot there that's not reported. And obviously from an NSPCC point of view, we're very conscious that of that 3.4%, 25% are under the age of 18. So we have a population of children and young people that are growing up in a situation where there is that racial tension, which will have impacts on how they view themselves, how they view the world, their place in the world, how they feel seen and appreciated and loved. So it's very important that we get it right as a community and as a nation to look after these children and young people.
When the role that you're performing, Senior Safeguarding Training Consultant, and you're chair of the Black Workers Support Group as well in NSPCC, I mean, that's something that I suppose most of us wouldn't have realised existed, let's be honest about it. So tell me a bit about it and how you've been part of the EDI journey at the NSPCC.
Yes, I think it started very much after the murder of George Floyd. A lot of people started talking about unconscious bias. And it was a very accessible way to talk about race discrimination, because it still makes everybody very, very uncomfortable to go there. And unconscious bias felt like a safe avenue to go into it. But we very much said at NSPCC that we do want to make sure that we're not just paying lip service to an issue that impacts not just our children and young people, but also our staff. So we decided let's do it right, and let's start with data. Let's look at what is the lived experience of our Black, brown and ethnically minoritized staff within the organisation, because we very much felt like it's very easy to go externally and tell other people what to do, but we had to kind of get our own house in order first. So it was very much about that. So we did surveys. We took the data from those surveys. We had organisations externally do pro bono work for us to look at our organisation, because obviously we couldn't kind of mark our own homework. And then we took it seriously. We were very transparent about it, because again, we were thinking if we get this right for ourselves, we're always going to be in a better place to protect children and young people. So let's get it right. So we really started having that conversation internally. Part of my job is creating training around safeguarding and child protection. And my passion as the chair of the Black Workers Support Group meant that I could combine those two. Because racism does have a traumatic impact. It is a safeguarding issue, and we needed to see it as such and really take it seriously and think about, if we get it right for ourselves and have this conversation effectively, then we can also support other organizations externally who come to us for safeguarding training to say, this is another element that you need to be thinking about when you're protecting children and young people. So we really kind of looked at, what's the data telling us? What does that mean for us internally as an organization? Put that in place and review. Very often when people do EDI work, it's maybe a piece of guidance or a program or maybe even just a little bit of training. We feel that wasn't going to cut it. We're currently in year 3 of our EDI process. And it's not just Black Workers Support Group. We have a support group for our LGBTQ plus siblings. We have a group for our staff who have disabilities. So all of us feed into the strategy of the NSPCC. So any work that we do as a charity has to have sight from one of our groups. so that we can feed in going, this is a voice that you're missing here, or this is language that we're not using anymore. Let's get it right. So that's where we're hoping to get to as an organisation, really putting the time and the effort into listening to our lived experience groups so that we can do better for the children and young people.
That sounds like a way to go, John Patrick, doesn't it? Is part of the problem the fact that we don't quite know how to talk about this, and that perhaps have we a specific problem in Northern Ireland where we've been so obsessed by the sectarian difficulties here that maybe we couldn't see what was happening in front of us until it really kind of blew up in our faces?
Well, I think there is something in this, in that we're obviously looking at this through the lens of social care, social work, and through service provision, if you like, because that's the environment we probably all understand to a greater and lesser degree. But part of the issue here is this is a societal issue in Northern Ireland, and certainly in the aftermath of what we've seen very sadly play out on our streets over this last 12 months and more, and we know it's an ongoing issue because you've referenced the statistics in terms of hate crime in particular. What we need to see is a much, I think, and certainly from UNISON perspective, we would say a much more comprehensive strategic approach from right across the Northern Ireland Executive to how you deal with this problem. So the Executive has previously had a racial equality strategy. It's getting to the end of its lifespan. It obviously will need to be updated, and it's going to have to take into account everything that we've seen over this period. And it will need to effectively reflect the lived experience of people and reflect the changing nature and dynamic of our society in order to effectively deal with the underlying issues. Often I think some of the work that we do, and Aine and colleagues in the department have been doing in particular over this last period, is often trying to deal with these issues when they've already manifested themselves. It's how we actually get into that preventative space, I think, will be really, really important. The work to deal with problems when they arise in the workplace or in the communities, hugely important. Visible support for people is hugely important. But dealing with the root causes, and particularly in a world in which we're now seeing the online space and social media play such a role here, I think will be critical going forward. And I think that's the challenge, not just for the Department of Health or for a regulator like NISC or for other public bodies. It's for all public bodies, and there really is a need for them to work together on that and to resource it and to have clear actions about how we're going to try and deal with this problem as a society, bearing in mind our context that you've already alluded to.
Speaking of the workforce, as you were there, Beverly, it's lovely to have you with us, and thanks for taking the trip from Derry to join us today. Tell us a bit about yourself and where you come from originally and what brought you here to Northern Ireland.
I was born in a country called Guyana in South America. I had an experience of living between two countries because my mother's a Barbadian. I came here to work after 10 years of working in the OR in Guyana, and I went into social care of the elderly. It was a first-time experience, and it grew on me. And I'm still here 20 years on.
We've heard so many times from people on this podcast who went into social care almost by accident, loved it and have stayed there. So you've not only stayed in social care, but you've stayed here as well. You've unfortunately, though, had your own experiences of racism. Tell us, if you can, about those experiences.
One in particular sticked out, just imprinted heavily upon me. It was a night duty, and one of the patients was being racist. It just went on for hours. And because there was no end to it, it was a night shift, there was no running away from it. You're stuck there. And none of my colleagues were brave enough to come forward and actually challenge. But that's the one that sticks with me because it kind of affected my mental health. And it kind of questioned, who am I and why am I here? And do I really need this? And there was so much support. The workforce, the management team, had a lot of support from them. My trade union, UNISON, was always there to support and guide. And the relatives of that patient took it on board themselves to tell him he have to apologize. And he did, because the family says it's wrong, you were not supposed to do that. And sometimes we forget that everybody's related to somebody. And sometimes the relatives do need to step in and say, this is where you draw the line. So, I wouldn't like nobody to go through that, especially at nights. In the day, you can move away, you can go outside. But a night shift, you're kind of stuck. And there was a lot of support, like I said. So that was one of the main ones that stuck in me. And because of the support that I get, I want to give back. So I become more active within UNISON and within my community, being there for people who come for the first time and don't know what to expect. You're coming all bright and shiny and expecting all things good and wonderful. And you don't realize you're a minority until you're here. And then it's like, oh, wake up, what's happening? So it's like a reality check for us coming. And you need that support network from not only from your workplace and from your community, but you need from your trade union.
Is there something worse about it, given that the person who is abusing you racially is someone that you're trying to help, somebody that you're there to care for? There's something just wrong about, even more wrong about that, isn't there?
Yeah. In that moment, it feels like you're not dealing with a sick person. You're just dealing with a racist. So stepping back from that moment and realizing, look, this individual is sick. Their kind of alarm bells for stepping over the line are not there. That's when they're wide open and whatever comes, you see. So maintaining that professionalism. But you need a lot of support to do that. Because in that moment, you're a human being. You're no longer a nurse or a carer. It kind of just hits you at home, and then you take a step back and you go, wow, was that really necessary? You kind of think twice. So it is hard when it's personal, especially the person calling you things that hit home. And you're thinking, should I really stay in this profession? And that was one of the things I questioned myself a good while after, because I always wanted to be a nurse. My mom is a retired nurse, and my sister's a nurse. So it's a kind of giving back to the community, kind of caring role. And that was the first time I actually questioned myself. Nursing is not just simple nursing anymore. It has become more complicated.
Ineke, you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, thank you, Beverly, for sharing that. As many of us who are people from the global majority or ethnically minoritized Northern Ireland, we recognize that feeling. And I think that that's what's so important for employers to understand, is that it does put you in a fight or flight state. And then having to explain that potentially to your colleagues becomes very difficult, because you're navigating both those spaces of, I'm a professional, these are people I'm caring for, but I'm also really afraid right now. And my adrenaline is pumping, and it's maybe not the time to talk. And what you were saying, Beverly, about your colleagues being so supportive, that makes all of the difference, because it then means that I'm now in a safe space where I can process those feelings, because I know that my team will address it. And that's the important part of allyship, is that it's not up to us as people from the global majority or ethnic minoritized to deal with this, because my whole organization and my colleagues and the person I'm on shift with are going to be the ones to step in and go, excuse me, no, this is not how we treat our staff. But sometimes it's difficult, because Aine said at the beginning, racism can be very insidious. We think about white supremacy as racism, but it often sits in little comments that people make that we often call, a death by 1,000 cuts, the microaggressions that are just consistent all day long. There's something going on, or somebody making a comment. And that's what I usually call, that's the language of racism that we all need to learn how to speak, so that when somebody makes that comment, I know what they mean. Beverly knows what they mean, but we need our white colleagues to also know what that means and say, yeah, no, we're not doing this. So that creates that space, and that's very often where the learning sits around what is the language of racism, what are the issues that we need to understand around intersectional identities, around, privilege, around all of that knowledge that we need to kind of bring together and have those discussions. As you were saying, we need to talk about it. And if we don't have the language to talk about it, then it gets insidious and it gets under everybody's skin, but nobody's talking about it. So we have to take that opportunity to bring it out and go, okay, we're going to do it. We're going to have a tough conversation.
Aine, if I could just bring you in, I thought it was interesting. You talked, Beverly, about the support, the great support you got from your management, from the union, etc., and you talking about it as well, there, Ineke. Colleagues stepping in, that's people are just sometimes, they find that idea difficult sometimes, don't they? They're maybe reluctant to do it. Maybe they don't feel that they are in the right position to challenge something. So, I mean, how do you enable and I suppose equip people who are working in the various different areas of social care and social work to stand up for their colleagues whenever something like that happens?
Yeah, I think, Wendy, you've recognised clearly that sort of calling something out, speaking up, it is very important, and Ineke has described it as allyship, and I kind of that concept I think is really important. I think we do some of it through training. So certainly within social care and our newly developed care and practice framework, sort of one of the big emphasis in that sort of initial training for social care staff is on values, and within that, then I think anti-racist practice is key, and again within social work training. It's about the values that you hold, but it's also about having the systems that support people to speak up, so that your manager will know why you're speaking up, that your response to perhaps service users or carers who are racist, is supported as an organisation, across the board. I mean, I think probably what is very important is for those of us who don't experience racism is that we are taught to recognise our own inherent biases, and that we start with ourselves in terms of, well, what are our views and what are our attitudes, and that degree of self-challenge is a very important thing. And with that self-challenge, I think then comes more confidence about saying, this is a very, I suppose, a real difficulty in our service provision, and that therefore that we all feel that sort of common responsibility about, as I say, speaking up and speaking out.
I suppose you also want to know that your union has your back. And John Patrick, that's perhaps where you come in with that kind of empowerment, maybe empowering colleagues to have that allyship, which actually is a very good word, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And I mean, it becomes no surprise that I would come on a podcast like this and would obviously encourage people, join a trade union, be part of a trade union in the workplace. That is the purpose of being in a union. It's there to provide support and advice, and on occasion to raise issues with your employer that maybe you feel you need that extra bit of support to do. So in social care as a sector, we obviously have a workforce. We have some workforce that is within our health and social care trusts. We have significant workforce that's within the independent sector or the community and voluntary sector. And there are differing levels of unionisation and union recognition across both sectors. But what I would say in terms of this piece of work, we have done quite constructive work as a union, and other unions have done constructive work with the likes of the independent healthcare providers group, because I think we all recognise there's a need to work in partnership on these issues. So last summer, whenever we saw the terrible spate of incidents last August, we did a piece of work that was communicated across social care providers about practical things that could be done in that instance to try and support the workforce, giving examples of the sorts of things that could be done and encouraging engagement between trade unions and in terms of providing that representative voice for staff and employers to actually look at how people could be kept safe and reassured. But there's much, much more I think that we can do and that we should look to do. And there is models there in terms of that employer-employee relationship, that relationship with trade unions. There's a model that we as trade unions would promote that was developed several years ago that had the Equality Commission at the table, the Labour Relations Agency, various representative bodies of business like the CBI, for example. And it's referred to as the Joint Declaration of Protection and for Dignity at Work and Inclusive Working Environment. And that sort of sets a framework, a common statement in terms of actually promoting inclusion, promoting equality of opportunity, and actually looking at those things like training and visible communications in the workplace. And there's model policies that employers can look to put in place around that. But all of that then needs to be looked at. It needs to be continually monitored. It requires dialogue. It requires training. And it will differ from workplace to workplace and from arena to arena in terms of the issues that need to be looked at. But starting with a model policy, disseminating that, getting some consistency around that can be a very, very good place to start. I think that's something that we could look to do more of to try and deal with these problems, particularly in social care and in social work, indeed, more generally.
Well, it's a good model, that, actually. And I mean, I had a look at it. It's easy to navigate. It's easy to get the correct points out of and so on. So if anyone's listening and hasn't gone down this road, maybe, as you say, that's not the worst place to start. Mm-hmm. I mean, what have you been hearing from your membership about racism at work, about maybe the effect that the racial violence of last summer and more recently has been having on the people either with whom they're working or indeed those that who are their kind of service users, because there are 124,000 people in Northern Ireland that don't originally come from here, and they're recipients of care as well as givers of it.
I think the consistent thing that we have heard from our membership is fear, apprehension, concern for their own safety, potentially going to and from work, sometimes concern in the community, a desire to, when they're at work, to want to know how loved ones or friends are in that moment. So it's dealing with all the pressures that we know are there in terms of working in the sector, and it is such a difficult and challenging job, and it's something that I take real issue with when people describe this work as low-skilled. I mean, it's far from low-skilled, and to do the work and then to also have that added apprehension and anxiety must be incredibly stressful for people. So those are the kinds of issues we've heard over this last 12 months, and Beverly can maybe speak to some of that as well in terms of her friends and colleagues that she would work with and engage with through the union and through her workplace on a regular basis. I think for us, there is something about, yes, you have to consistently get the message out there as to how important this group of workers is to the delivery of an essential public service, but it's also about bringing it back to the human element. I mean, people should be treated with dignity and respect. They shouldn't face racism or hatred or discrimination in our society. It should just be unacceptable. So it's trying to get that message out there at the same time as we're highlighting how important this workforce is and how increasingly important it's going to be just due to the nature of our society.
What have you been hearing from your friends and colleagues, Beverly?
Well, fear, a lot of fear. And a lot of people feel intimidating, especially when signs go up that says landlords shouldn't rent out the properties to foreigners. People having to put up signs that say Filipino live there, identify themselves apart from their neighbor for safety. A lot of fear, and it's real because people don't send their children to play when it's sunny, because these riots happen when it's sunny. We come from sunny countries. We love the sunshine, and now we're in houses when the sun is out for fear that there'll be a riot, because it seems to happen whenever the sun is out. So it's about protection and justice too. There's training and there is compassion and there's dignity, but there's a justice element that deters other people from repeating the same thing over and over again. Because last year, somehow we had a lot of things happen and people were in their houses and shops were being burnt, and then it started all over again. So it's re-traumatizing the people that were already traumatized. And many people that came here before they started working, some would have been refugees or asylum seekers. So you're re-traumatizing a set of people. It's like going back down that lane that you already stepped away from. And you made all this progress, and now taking you back there. and it's putting a support in place for people's mental health. It's okay to say there's protection, but there must be mental health services available to support these people, and there must be justice in place to prevent it happening again.
Quite right too. Ineke, how do you, I mean, you're 3 years into this project in the NSPCC, and it's obviously not going to go away, it's going to continue. How do you begin to dismantle racism in a workplace, in a country, let's face it, but in a workplace, and rebuild an organisation in a way which enables everybody to feel safe and where everyone can thrive and be supported?
I think it does start with training and having that conversation. So sometimes you need those trailblazers who kind of just, put their head above the parapet and go, okay, let's talk about it. And begin that conversation to give people a sense of that confidence that this is actually okay to talk about. And one of the things that I said, especially whenever I was starting doing this training, is that, folks, we talk about the hardest things there are. We talk about abuse, we talk about child abuse, we talk about adult abuse. These are some of the worst things that we talk about. And yet it's racism we don't talk about. Let's bring all of that together. If we recognize that it's a safeguarding issue and understand that, then let's talk about it in that context, because we know how to do that, right? But one of the things that has always stayed with me and that I always bring into any learning is a quote by Peter Drucker, who said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. We could have the best policy in the world. It will not work if your culture doesn't have space for it. It won't. And that starts with dialogue. It starts with difficult conversations. And at some stages, as Beverly was saying, justice. This is the organization that we want to have. These are how we treat each other. These are the rules around how we treat each other. If you're not able to do that, then maybe this isn't the right organization for you anymore. And it's very brave for an organization to say that, but EDI work, equality, diversity and inclusion work, is about courage. It is about saying we're no longer tolerating this. It is not banter. Yeah, we often, I think Merriam-Webster defines banter as a joking repartee. But that's how somebody else might see it. But the person who understands the language of racism, I'm now in danger, right? So I either laugh along with you, which then everybody thinks, oh, they're fine. But that's a safety mechanism. Because now if I laugh and we're buddies, you're not going to maybe harm me anymore. Or you leave. And organizationally, some people that we've worked with have said, we don't have a lot of ethnic minoritized staff in our organization. And you're like, why? Why? Have they left? Did they not join you? What is that about? So it's about being very honest and transparent about who you are as an organization and what you were trying to achieve. And a lot of it is modeling behavior. It's training, it's giving people a safe space. And at the end of that line, having that justice piece of, we have, for example, an anti-racism policy where it's very clearly described microaggressions are not acceptable within our organization. And the culture bit is that we talk about impact and intent. So just because you didn't mean it doesn't mean that the impact is any less. And we use the kind of the analogy, if I stand on your foot and I say I didn't mean it, it doesn't mean that it didn't hurt, right? So you have to recognize that from that point of view as well. So there's a lot of work that goes into that conversation aside from policy and aside from guidance. It's how do we as a team have that conversation. So it's a lot of leadership that needs to be shown. And obviously now I'm just talking about racism, but we tackle this from all the different lived experiences because we need to. And the allyship piece, we talked about how difficult it can be when somebody says something racist and you as a staff member are like, I don't know what to say about this. But it's coming back into yourself. That made me really uncomfortable. I don't like that language. Can we just stop for a second? I don't think this is how we talk to each other. And we call that calling out. So Harvard did a really great resource about this. So you can call somebody out in the moment and say, that made me uncomfortable, right? Because I'm taking the person who's just been harmed into protection. That made me uncomfortable. Can we talk about this? And sometimes that's not appropriate. So you might say, we're going to talk about it later. We're going to take this offline later. I'm going to have a word with you and say, these are not the standards of our organization. This is not how we work. So there's different ways that you can address it within that moment. And sometimes giving people those skills takes down that level of anxiety around dealing with the conversation.
Very interesting. I mean, a lot of work, as Ineke said there, Anya, and I can see you're thinking perhaps that as well, but it needs to be done, doesn't it? If the system is going to work and if we're going to be able to deal with this at all.
Yeah, it very much does, and I think it requires constant challenge and a sort of constant scrutiny as well, because it is all too easy for people to hold attitudes and display behaviours that are racist. And I suppose I absolutely hear what Ineke is saying about culture, and would agree absolutely that is the most important thing. But I do believe that guidance and policy plays a supporting role in the culture of organisations as well. So certainly within the department where we have the policy remit, and in relation to the social care workforce, we have a newly published social care workforce strategy, and within that there's a commitment to, I suppose, supporting employers to support their staff better and within this context. Also looking at things like, ethical recruitment practices, also looking at how we ensure that our social care workforce is valued. And within that concept of how we value our social care workforce is how we value people for who they are, but also for what they bring to our service as well. I think that is particularly relevant in terms of our international social care workforce, in terms of, we want our workforce to be as diverse as our society is, and to bring that the kind of knowledge and experience and lived experience in particular to enrich our services. So a lot of work going on in various different aspects of the sort of collective and collaborative approach we need to tackle this scourge of racism.
What about, just to kind of look at it from a slightly different angle for a moment, is there a problem with racism in the workforce? I mean, given that we now have quite a large population of people living in Northern Ireland who come from somewhere else, there are a lot of children with those families as well. We tended in Northern Ireland to have a fairly closed view of the outside world. Have you any concerns about the fact that some of the workforce may themselves have racist attitudes, and maybe they don't realise it, but maybe they have?
And I think we have to accept that, the problems of our society are reflected in our various workforces as well. So undoubtedly there will be people in our workforce who can be racist, display racist behaviours. I would hope that the training that we do, rather than the training that we do in the future, I suppose mitigates against that to some degree. But I remember very clearly in my own social work training, which is going back a little, but being very actively taught to recognise, and I think I said it earlier, recognise your own inherent beliefs and attitudes, and that it starts from that, so that we have to challenge ourselves. So I think we would have to say yes, there is clearly a problem because our workforce reflects society. But I also believe that there are things that we can do I suppose, to challenge that and also to support people to understand racism. So it's not always about challenge. It is often about education. And I suppose people not having had the opportunity to explore myths. And we know there's a lot of myths out there in terms of, people from other countries and other communities living in our society, that we sometimes people may not realise that actually something's a racist trope or a misunderstanding. So it is very definitely about challenge, but it's also about support.
I mean, one of the NSPCC's EDI priorities is diversification of the workforce, because, as it says itself, can only be there for every child if we are reflective and representative of more of the communities and individuals that we serve and support. That must be the situation in Northern Ireland that we should be heading for.
Yeah. And it's about creating a space where you, ethically, right? So if you know in your organization that you have this issue, then from an ethical point of view, you have to do something about that, so that when you go to recruit ethnically minoritized staff, you know they're coming into a space where they're going to be held and supported and valued and appreciated for who they are and what they bring. And it's about that, that diversity of thought, and it's about recognizing that people will bring their own points of view, that not everybody from an ethnically minoritized community is going to think the same, just like not everybody from white communities think the same. And it's when you start to break it down on that human level, it starts to become a little bit easier, because that's what we want. We want people to think outside the box. And a lot of it is recognizing the institutional nature of racism, because even in recruitment, for example, there's lots of research around racism in recruitment, and I'd want any of the listeners to think about, how often have you seen an advertisement for a job that says, "We want somebody to hit the ground running"? What does that mean? That means we want somebody who thinks like us, who moves like us, who works like us. That already tells you a lot about the organization you're going to go into, because if you have different ideas and you're an out-of-the-box thinker, that's probably not a place where you're going to thrive. But even in the medical field, and I do again want to say a little bit of a trigger warning, if we think about, there was a slave owner back in the day, and people often say, why do we have to talk about slavery when we're talking? That was so long ago. I'll tell you why. I'll give you an example. So James Marion Sims, a lot of people who work in the gynecological field will probably know his name. He was the forerunner for everything we know, for example, about forceps delivery or cesarean sections. He practiced this on the bodies of enslaved Black women because there was a belief that Black women did not feel the pain in the same way that white women do, right? Now, fast forward to 2025. Black and brown women are more likely to die in childbirth in the United Kingdom because of lack of proper services. So it matters. It matters that we understand the legacy of racism and that it actually harms Black and brown bodies. It's our duty to get that and to challenge it.
I'd like each of you to have a think about a key takeaway for people who are listening to this podcast today. For anyone who feels now that they would really like to make a difference and to help prevent racism, John Patrick, could I ask you first, maybe what you would have as your key takeaway from this?
I think a key takeaway would be, for people who maybe find themselves affected by these issues, to know there is support there for you, and that you can look to the likes of your union, for example, for advice and support in those circumstances. I think as well, certainly from a union and employer perspective, I think we should try and deepen partnership working on these issues. I think we've got a long way to go still on it, and I think that would be a positive thing that we could look toward for the future. And I suppose finally, I know I've probably done three key takeaways here, but
that's okay.
I'll get away with it. But I think finally the issue around how we do need to see this as a societal issue, And I know this podcast, by its nature, is going to focus in on, NISC's remit and so on. But I think we do need to see this as a wider societal issue. If we're going to address these issues as we see them arising in social care and social work, we need to look at the society in which we live in more generally.
Aine, what about you?
For me, I think the key takeaway is about challenge and self-challenge and challenge of others as well. And I think that's particularly important for those of us who have white privilege, is that we examine ourselves in the first place, and then that we take that into other arenas as well.
Beverly, what about you?
The key takeaway would be racism is not an alone thing. We see you, we hear you, and we understand. We want to support you, and we'll be here for you. For the survivors of racism, reach behind you and help the next person come in. Not many people will have the courage, but the support is there if you need it.
Ineke?
I think that it lies in empathy. We talk a lot about lived experience. It's just understanding that there are people in this world who see the world and experience the world differently to me, and I want to understand that. So it's about understanding lived experience, difference, in empathy, but also in authenticity. What do I not know? What do I not know about your lived experience? And what can I do to find that out? And there's even just this, us having this conversation, how powerful is this? So there's a lot of good work that's happening that's being done by amazing people that is turning that dial. So it might be slow, but it's happening. And I would just encourage everybody to be a part of that.
And where do you see us going from here? I mean, what you were saying there about a lot of really good work being done by some amazing people. There's a terrible tendency sometimes to reinvent the wheel whenever it comes to the way in which government works and so on, where everybody then ends up doing the same thing rather than maybe taking the best examples from work that's already in train for the sake of argument. So where do we go from here, and how do you get that really good work spread out more widely?
I think it's exactly what JP was saying. It's getting that collaboration. Let's all sit around the table. What are you doing? What are you doing? We're doing that too. What are we missing? What are you missing? Like, how can we support each other? Like, not gatekeep knowledge and experience, and really kind of sit in there. But I do go back to this. And whenever I started my career looking at EDI, I remember I was speaking to a mentor of mine, and I was like, what is the one thing? And I thought this was going to be this massive, emotional moment. And he was like, data. Get the data. Because otherwise you don't know what you're talking about. Because if you don't know how your staff feels and you don't know how many people are experiencing racism, what are you talking about? You have to understand the problem in order to fix it. And that's been kind of a guiding light for me in this work, is like, let's understand what the issues are and deal with those, and be humble enough to realize that it's going to take time, that you're not going to be able to do everything in one go. So be kind again, empathy.
Is that the kind of message that you try to get across, Beverly, with your group in UNISON, the Black and Migrant Workers Group?
Yes, we do. We meet every month, online or sometime in person, and it's all about lived experience and identifying with each other. We understand. We've had that journey. We're on the journey, and we can be there for each other.
And is it something that you share with the non-Black and migrant workers? Because I suppose there are often the attitudes that need to change, aren't they?
Yeah, we do. We have a lot of allies, and they're very good at supporting and standing up for us. We would love more allies. And because the more allies you get on board, it means that you're actually making a difference. You're having an impact, and the world will be a different place soon. For now, we have a journey. It's a lot of work. And we have to realize where we're at and be honest about it. Northern Ireland is a developing community. We're developing in that you're dealing with your own sectarianism, before you even realize that there is a lot of prejudice and racism and biases on top of that. And it's separating them and working on yourself before you reach out to others. And it's all about growth, personal growth and development, and being able to put your hand up and say, look, I got it wrong. Can we start again? Can we do a do-over?
And Anya, you have a lot on your plate already, as does the minister and as does the executive. But this is something that needs to be tackled, doesn't it? I mean, there's no point in saying we can nip it in the bud, because I think the bud's got rather large. But it does need to be tackled. It's not one of those things that we can keep on kicking down the road, is it?
Absolutely not. I mean, the anti-racist practice in all its forms, needs to be core to all of the things that we do, because it affects all the things that we do. And I suppose for me, we need to continue with the constant vigilance, and we need to persevere as well. And we do that in all sorts of ways, but I think it's very important that we don't see it as sitting separately. That it's sort of integral to all of the service provision that we deliver and how we do that, and how we give the support to people in this society who need it.
JP?
Yes, I mean, and just to pick up on your point about Beverly's role within our own union and the role of colleagues here in the Black and Migrant Workers group in UNISON, we absolutely try to make sure that the work of that group is mainstreamed right across everything that we try to do as a union. And I think it's something that we're becoming increasingly conscious of and aware of, because it reflects the diversity of our society and the growing diversity of our society. I think we, like everyone, probably need to do more. I think we need to do more to make sure that we have the right proportionality and opportunities for representation there within our own union structures, in the same way that we would look to any organisation to try and do the same thing. So certainly for us, to pick up on Anya's point, it is about how we try to make sure this work is core, that it's not seen as something that is something to do additionally or something that we'll do whenever the time is right. We do need to look at it as core now and as critical to all aspects of our work. And I think for public sector in general, it's something that has to be really, really important as well.
Thanks very much for listening to today's podcast. If you want to hear more on Care to Chat, you'll find all episodes of the podcast, all 3 series, on the Northern Ireland Social Care Council website. Thank you for listening. Make sure that you follow us, that you rate us, and tell all your friends and colleagues.